Just
Arcade culture is weird. You pay money to get some shiny gold coins, use those to play riveting games for a maximum of 2 minutes at a time, and if you play them well enough, you get a new currency that replaces your arcade doubloons and can be used to barter with a likely underpaid employee for their spider rings and fun-sized candy. After the rise and fall of
That's
dedicated
true.
coin-operated or coin-op arcades in the 1980s, it's a wonder that arcades are even still around at all. I frequented the local amusement
What's
center,
even an
shout out
arcade?
Adventure Landing, with an arcade, mini golf, and laser tag as much as the next kid. And despite the strangeness of the system, in retrospect, it was one of my favorite places to visit. I mean, it's every recreational activity smushed into one place, so much so that modern arcades can't seem to decide what they are. Are they a casino or a mobile game haven? Are they a rec center or a carnival? The lack of continuity in game type, venue style, and age demographic are what make modern arcades, as well as their infamous prize redemption setup, kinda weird.
Hi,
But
Phantom.
arcades weren't
How
always
are
like
you?
they are today. In the early 1900s, the first penny arcades were introduced, also called amusement arcades. These penny arcades were the first instance of coin-operated mechanical recreation machines modeled after attractions that were already
Good
around
too.
at things like carnivals and fairs. If you believed in fate, a machine like a love tester or a fortune-telling machine could now read yours for you. Mutoscopes, a sort of early iteration of this technological wonder, provided media entertainment. And things like bagatelle tables were around as early forms of pinball machines which would be invented and come to fruition in later decades. Most of these early penny arcade devices are designed around the novelty of the item. You come to see the new technology, get your fun, and then move on to something else. Spending an entire day in the arcade, or even more than an hour or so, to meander through the different machines was probably unheard of, because once your penny was spent, there was a limited amount to actually do. I'm sure most people back then would much rather sit on the beach in full daywear for hours than play the measly predecessors of video games. Penny arcades
Measly
progressed through the next few
predecessors.
years, with what's considered the first pinball machine being invented in 1931. It was called Wiffle Board and cost 5 cents to play. And another iteration called Ballyhoo was brought out in
Although
1934.
5 cents, that's
While
too
they might look a
expensive.
little dull in comparison to modern pinball machines, these games were the first of their kind and were the ancestors of video game cabinets yet to come. Some
Imagine
pinball
playing
operators
video
would give away
games.
prizes based on high scores,
I've
and this is one of
never.
the first major instances of players winning prizes for playing an arcade game. It's hard to find information on what prizes would be given out exactly, but unfortunately for the people playing these at the time, they probably didn't include such classics as the Chinese finger trap or electric shock gum in the 1930s. Throughout the next 30 years into the 60s, mechanical arcade games like Wiffle Board would evolve into electromechanical or EM games. Now there were games like Periscope, a shooting submarine simulator where you launch torpedoes, Rifleman, a Wild West-themed target shooter, and racing simulators like Indy 500 and Speedway, using projections, a steering wheel,
Speedway.
and a pedal to really make you feel like you were on the road. Watch out, Speed Racer. And just a bit earlier in 1958, the beloved arcade classic Skee-Ball was patented, being the first or one of the
Skee-Ball.
first ticket dispensing
Yeah.
machines.
I've heard
Tickets
about
and
it
their
before.
prices are one of the most notable parts of modern arcades, but they still didn't take off for another few decades. So what happened in those few decades? Well, video games were invented for one thing. Maybe you've heard of Pong, made by Atari in 1972, but these new games were
Heard about
challenging
it.
those little white bars with playable characters, virtual environments, and mechanics like shooting and dodging. By 1983, video game arcades were at their peak. Hardcore players would man machines for hours. Competing players would line up their quarters for a spot in line to play. The graphics were getting more detailed and the games more intricate. Dragon's Lair might not look that exciting next to, I don't know, Fortnite or something, but this was hard-hitting stuff back in the day. So what happened to the popularity of the 1980s video arcade? Well, there's a few theories. The hardcore players mainly stuck around, but some people blame the fall in the trend on the rise of home consoles. Home consoles had been around since the 70s, but by the late 80s, classics like the SNES, Sega Genesis, and Commodore 64 were beginning to take hold. Then, by the late 90s to early 2000s, almost everyone had some sort of home console, whether it be an N64, a PlayStation, or a Dreamcast. Many people just stopped going to video arcades altogether in favor of playing their favorite games at home and saving the quarter it cost per play. On a home console, you could save your progress, play as long as you want, and
Saving
cry
progress,
over
I
dying
think
over and
it's
over
a
in the comfort of your own home.
huge
It was around
advantage
this time
of
that there
playing
was a
at
major
home.
shift from typical arcade games for sport or entertainment to be converted or switched out entirely for games that offered something more engaging: tickets that were awarded for playing. Arcades shifted from appealing to young teens and adults to young children, and soon most arcade games and their simple cabinets weren't enough. Bright colors, loud designs, and flashy aesthetics were now being used to draw in the younger market that had mostly replaced the hardcore cabinet players of the 80s. And with this change came the rise of tickets and redemption prizes. I mean, have you ever met a kid that didn't like tons of bright colors and cheap plastic prizes?
That's true.
It's the perfect draw for children and their
Let me get
excitable
a...
look, something shiny in nature. Some games or arcades had
Alright.
specially branded content like these Namco Pac-Man Fun Points tickets or these Chuck E. Cheese ticket redemption prizes from the 80s and 90s. For the most part, though, the tickets and their prizes were generic, and over time the arcades known for
today,
joysticks and
Fanta?
high scores were now filled with things like
I get a right.
basketball, whack-a-mole, and Deal or No Deal. Not to knock entirely on modern arcades, though, a lot of these games are evolutions of older ones, so their place in arcades isn't totally unprecedented. Shooter types have been around since Periscope and Rifleman, so something like Big Buck Hunter isn't strange to see. I would be interested to hear what a Rifleman lover from the 60s has to say about the Jurassic Park Seated Adventure, though, or any of the others like it. With surround sound, privacy curtains, and rumble vibration on the guns, these modern shooters are a huge step up from an old projector-based submarine simulator. Driving games like Crazy
Look.
Taxi have also evolved into motorcycle
I
drivers
made a
with tilt
gradient.
controls and cabinet-based Mario Kart. You just can't escape this guy. At some arcades, there's
Mario.
even usually a good handful of classic cabinet games still around, though things like Pac-Man and Galaga usually don't reward tickets, in my experience at least, so there's not as much to incentivize players who aren't only in it for the nostalgia. So these modern arcade games aren't entirely like their ancestors, but they also don't exactly stand out as far as gameplay and familiarity goes. I think it's safe to say that they even belong and have a rightful place in arcades. These, though, yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
I'll openly admit that I sometimes play mobile games and occasionally even find them fun. In high school, I played Crossy Road like my life depended on it during class because I felt unlocking Emo Goose was way more important and fulfilling than reading the Scarlet Letter. But there's a bit of controversy about if games like Crossy Road or Doodle Jump actually belong in modern arcades at all. They're usually played on these big
Probably
displays
they do.
that are like giant versions of phone screens and dumb down the already simple gameplay of mobile games even more. Since mobile games and just smartphones in general are a newer technology, these arcade versions are clearly geared towards kids. Even more increasingly popular than recognizable mobile games is the influx of branded games from popular franchises. This particular Kung Fu Panda themed game has the player hit these targets that look like bongos to get a high score. Rhythm
Bongos.
or physical movement games like Dance Dance Revolution aren't uncommon, but obviously
but
tacking
Dance
a
Dance
brand
Revolution
onto
is
it
a classic
makes people
arcade
miss the
game.
less corporate days when games felt more original. So, if you're a young kid and you're not playing Galaga because you don't know what that is, or Kung Fu Panda
What
because
the
that
fuck
movie
is
came out
Galaga?
back in 2008, or Doodle Jump because you're an iPad kid that only uses apps like TikTok or those scammy GTA ripoffs,
Scammy GTA
what to play
ripoffs.
instead? Well, there's a definite appeal to games that are a step away from traditional arcade games, even more so than mobile games. Arcade versions of classic carnival booth games are becoming more prevalent for being more involved and physical. Water shooters and bottle knockers are among just a few that I've seen, though I'm pretty sure that if it already exists, there's what I'd call an arcade port for it. But do these belong in arcades either? Do these qualify
knows?
as arcade games any more or less
I think
than
if it's in
Crossy
an,
Road or
in an
SpongeBob
arcade, it
SquarePants
belongs to an
Hit the Beat?
arcade.
There's still entire venues that are made for adults, with barcades, the cleverly named bar and arcade crossover type venues, becoming more and more popular in recent years. With adult-centric venues, arcades tend to trade something like Wacky Ducks for games that are more engaging for grown-ups. And what do adults love? Why, money, of course, which is why game shows that revolve around winning large sums of money have been integrated into arcades. Except now you can win something even better than cash prizes. Paper tickets.
Paper
I guess I get the
tickets.
intent
Wow.
with these games. They're recognizable, easy to understand, and even easier to function as cash grabs when players look at the overly simple premise and take a gamble with the odds. But with games like Wheel of Fortune sneaking their way into modern arcades, the question of does this actually belong in an arcade seems to be answered more easily with each 3D rendered game show host that wanders their way on screen. Despite their name, game shows aren't even actually games in the traditional sense of the word. Most of the time they
They're
involve
just
trivia or more or less random guessing, and the game revolves more around the suspense of it than any actual playing. But I'm not here to debate with GSN lovers, and I don't really have any beef with game shows when they're on their own turf, at least. It just feels like a bit of a cash grab to draw players in with known franchises they love just to sucker them out of a few quarters. I guess it's sort of a trend. Speaking of cash grabs, it's time we touch on another very notable type of arcade game, for better or for worse. Although winning tickets is a big draw of modern arcades, most games still require players to get a decent score while playing before awarding any considerable number of tickets. After all, if they awarded hundreds of tickets to just any kid who wandered in, they might make less of a profit on their plastic rainbow slinkies they bought for 10 cents a
Plastic
piece.
rainbow slinkies.
So most arcade games don't offer many tickets per play with an average score, and if they do, they're likely a bit more difficult than something like Whack-A-Mole.
Oh,
Instead, why not
the
play
hoop
the
game
Mega
is
Super
so
Ticket
good.
Dispenser
I love it.
3000
Also, I love
Extreme
going to
Edition,
arcades. It's
or
so
any of its
so
cousins.
nice.
These
I always
games that
have
are
a lot of
mostly luck
fun.
or chance-based and offer high amounts of tickets are widely known as jackpot games, or any other variation of the name that implies it just absolutely shills out those sweet, sweet tickets for little to no effort. But there's some controversy around these games as well, and it goes beyond questioning their place in an arcade. Are these high-ticket jackpots with overly flashy colors and lights and simple mechanics actually gateway gambling machines for children?
Yes, they are.
Short and
course
obvious
they are.
answer, no, or they wouldn't even exist. But longer and more complicated
They might do.
counterpoint,
They are.
aren't they still
What do you
kind of
think?
shady? They are clearly targeted towards a younger audience. That's pretty apparent, and I feel like spending money to spin a big wheel for the potential to win big falls into the gambling threshold, even if it doesn't technically count. I mean, if jackpot games counted, then really the whole arcade should count, and then the whole system would be null. But what I'm getting at, though, is close to the same point I made with the game show arcade ports. The entire point of these flashy machines is to draw naive and optimistic players into spending money on a play, only to usually walk away with a measly 5 tickets or less. The same can be said about
5
similar games in the
tickets.
same vein, like the infamous Claw Machine, Gachapon Dispenser, or Quarter Pusher. Comparing these to the original version and appeal of classic arcades, this money-making tactic just doesn't seem to fit in very well with the intention of entertainment and amusement. They're just not games. They're luck
They're
testers.
not games.
Or are they? There exists a whole sub-community of arcade players that are really into jackpots and how to win them, and these people are probably easily every arcade's worst nightmare. They find the easiest ways to win these jackpots by getting the timing just right and exploit the machines for all the tickets they're worth. They then will even make tutorials on how to win for other players to get their hundreds of tickets too, or make content around their skill, like winning
Yeah,
every
people
jackpot in an
don't
arcade or
like this.
completing some sort of ticket
Couldn't
winning
sleep,
challenge.
couldn't sleep.
As a kid, I saw the jackpot prize as something elusive that you had to be really lucky to get. So it kind of takes the fun and amazement out of winning plays now that there
How
are
about
everyday
you?
people winning 12 times in a row during a casual afternoon. It's like revealing the secret behind a magic trick. These jackpot fanatics just make me feel even more so that these games probably don't have much of a place in arcades for
Therapy
multiple
a few
reasons.
hours.
There's a
Nice.
lot more game
Good
types that I could
therapy.
touch on, but there's so many that are constantly evolving that it would definitely take too much time to mention every single one. Let's just say that if it's already popular and can be exploited to make money, there's probably a version of it that exists in an arcade somewhere. But at least, all these games, even the slightly questionable ones, still only cost $0.25 to play. Oh. Oh wait, what? As arcade games continue to become more modernized, the arcades themselves have to adapt with the times too. And in the height of the digital age, it only makes sense that the venues that can afford it have swapped coin ops for mostly or entirely digitized payment options. Card readers on the machines can accept payment from credit cards, though some franchises have moved on to play cards or something similar that are loaded with credits and used as a sort of in-house arcade-specific credit card for the games. While these cards do solve the problem of coin-jammed machines and quarter eaters, this technology comes at a cost, and when paired with expensive new games and experiences, the prices for some arcade games has risen into the double digits for a single play with the most immersive and modern entertainment. It's speculated though that these play cards aren't around just for the modern appeal and ease of access, but also because they make spending money that much easier. It's not as hard to hand over a card to swipe when you can't see the quarters actively disappearing from your token cup. And it's not just tokens and quarters that are being phased out, but physical tickets and even traditional prize counters that have begun being replaced. Along with play
never
cards,
seen a
some venues
prize
have traded the
counter.
cost of rolls of thousands of tickets for the cheaper and slightly less wasteful alternative of receipt paper. Instead of receiving one physical ticket per ticket won in the game, newer games with updated technology will now print out a slip with a QR code or other barcode that's worth the tickets earned in-game, functioning as a sort of ticket coupon. I do have to say, I remember watching the masses of tickets being fed into the ticket eater at my local roller skating rink, and seeing the now shredded pieces coming out on the other end directly into a trash can that was just full of discarded tickets, totally unusable. I get that they didn't want kids fishing counted tickets out of the bin to use for their own prizes, but the sight still made me feel kind of disappointed at the waste of it all, even as an 8-year-old. So these new ticket slips
Yeah, it was
definitely
very
reduced
wasteful.
the total waste made by tickets, and I'm sure they also save both time and money. No more ticket eaters to maintain, no ticket dispenser jams, and no more rolls of tickets to keep in stock in the machines. Despite the positives, some people still understandably feel nostalgic for and miss the tickets of old. I have to say though, that even though it might offer some benefits of its own, I think the absence of prize counters is even more missed than a few paper tickets. In some venues, depending on size, staffing, and priority, traditional prize exchange counters with all of the definitely overpriced and cheaply made prizes that still look so appealing in their inviting glass cases have just been completely phased out. Prize dispensing machines, basically vending machines, now sometimes take the place of the employee that would usually have to sit and wait for 2 minutes while little Johnny tries to decide what to get. More so than seeming a bit out of place in any classic or modern arcade setting, these automatic prize vendors also just seem mildly dystopian. Automated systems replacing manual ones, of course, isn't something new, and if anything, as arcades continue to struggle to compete with home video games, it's likely for the best that this is used as a part of the effort to keep arcades alive and profitable. But still, it just rubs me the wrong way a little. It doesn't fit in or
rubs me
feel
the
right,
wrong
and it's a
way.
bit elusive to the rise of AI and machines that will eventually take over the world, or whatever. So if you've made it this far through the arcade, you've now played your favorite 5 games for a total of $20, ate some nachos with that questionable goopy cheese at the snack bar, and without a prize dispensing android stealing someone's job and probably data mining in the process, you now have amassed a sizable collection of tickets in neatly folded stacks that you can shove into your pockets, or in giant disorganized piles if you're a degenerate. On to the beloved prize counter. I find it interesting that arcade prize redemption counters have garnered this culture
And I
and
forgot how
reputation
to
that they
speak
just
today.
can't grow out of. No matter how modern the games and technology are, at pretty much every arcade you visit, you'll still be able to find the same classic prizes. There's army men and sticky hands, bouncy balls and parachute guys, hacky
Parachute
sacks and
guys.
bubble bottles, and
Never seen
individual
those.
pieces of your favorite candy, all for the low price of 50 tickets each, which only took you 3 tries on the Kung Fu Panda machine to get. Obviously, the majority of prizes have to be cheap for the arcade to be able to make a profit on them. But not to worry, there are some better options if you wander away
How
from
are
the
you?
glass cabinet to the wall
Not
of wonder
good.
behind the counter.
My tummy
There's fidget
aches.
spinners, which
And
are
you.
totally still relevant, lava lamps, which are also totally still relevant,
Totally still relevant.
full-size dolls, stuffed animals, yo-yos, and plenty of other toys that are apparently worth way more than bouncy balls and candy. If you work your way up to the really big stuff,
I
though, you
think I'm
can even
gonna
win
lay
yourself prizes
down.
like
I
light-up
don't feel
signs.
so well.
Cold and hungry
I'll
and
see you
sleepy.
later. Cold, hungry, and sleepy is bad. Bye.